There is a crack in the eastern face of the second pyramid at Giza. Not a fracture caused by age, not damage from erosion, but a precise, deliberate incision cut at an angle that aligns almost perfectly with the point where the sun rises on the summer solstice. It has been there for roughly 4,500 years. Millions of people have walked past it. Thousands of archaeologists have documented it. Yet almost no one has fully explained why it needed to be that precise. Because here's the strange part. You don't need that level of accuracy to build a tomb. And that is where this story begins. Across the world, scattered across continents and separated by thousands of years, human beings built enormous structures out of stone. Some weigh hundreds of tons. Some were assembled with astonishing precision. Some align with the movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars, with an accuracy that would challenge modern surveying equipment. The standard explanation is familiar. These structures were monuments, temples, tombs, expressions of political power and religious devotion, built by rulers seeking authority over both the living and the dead. And to be clear, that explanation is not wrong. It almost certainly contains part of the truth. But there is another possibility. Because hidden inside these structures is a pattern, a consistency, a level of precision that becomes more difficult to dismiss the closer you look. When engineers began carefully studying the Great Pyramid of Giza, they expected impressive construction. What they discovered was something far more remarkable. The four sides of the pyramid differ in length by an average of less than 5 centimeters. Less than 5 centimeters, across a footprint measuring more than 230 meters on each side. Even more astonishing, the entire structure is aligned to true north with an error of only a tiny fraction of a degree. For comparison, some much more recent buildings constructed with advanced instruments achieved lower levels of accuracy. The Great Pyramid appears to outperform them. Now perhaps the Egyptians were simply extraordinarily careful. Perhaps they were. But precision of this kind requires more than careful workmanship. It requires a method, a system of measurement, a system of verification, and a way of preserving that knowledge across decades of construction, involving thousands of workers. The problem is that no one agrees on exactly how it was done. And the Great Pyramid is not alone. In southeastern Turkey lies a site that forced archaeologists to reconsider one of the most important assumptions in human history. Its name is Gobekli Tepe. For thousands of years it remained hidden beneath deliberate mounds of earth. When excavations began, researchers uncovered enormous stone pillars arranged in circular formations. Some stand nearly 6 meters tall. Some weigh more than 10 tons. Their surfaces are covered with intricate carvings of animals, symbols, and human-like figures. The most surprising detail is not what was found, it's when it was built. Gobekli Tepe dates back approximately 11,500 years. Think about that for a moment. It is older than Stonehenge by more than 6,000 years, older than writing, older than what we traditionally call civilization itself. According to the accepted model of prehistory, the people who built this site were hunter-gatherers. They had no cities, no kingdoms, no agriculture on a large scale, no centralized government. And yet somehow they organized the labor required to quarry, transport, carve, and erect these massive stones. Then, at some point, they did something even stranger. They buried the entire site. Deliberately, layer by layer, as if they wanted to preserve it or hide it, or perhaps leave it waiting for a future generation, one that had not yet arrived. The archaeologist Klaus Schmidt spent decades excavating Gobekli Tepe. He described it as a discovery that forces us to rethink the origins of civilization. And perhaps that is exactly what it does. Because sites like Gobekli Tepe raise a difficult question. What if our ancestors knew more than we assume they did? There is another mystery hidden inside many ancient stone structures, one that cannot be seen, only heard, or perhaps felt. It is a field of research that occupies an uncomfortable place in archaeology, too scientific to dismiss, too unusual to fully embrace. It concerns acoustics. When researchers began studying the acoustic properties of ancient stone chambers in Ireland, Britain, and Malta, they expected to find little more than echoes. Instead, they found something unexpected. Many of these chambers resonate within a remarkably similar frequency range, around 110 to 120 Hz. This frequency corresponds roughly to the lower register of the adult male voice. Inside these chambers, sound behaves differently. Voices do not simply travel through the space. They linger. They reverberate. They create standing wave patterns that can make sections of the walls and floors seem almost alive. In certain locations, a single spoken tone can fill the entire structure. Researchers noted something even more intriguing. This frequency range overlaps with frequencies known to influence human neurological activity. Studies have suggested that prolonged exposure can alter concentration, attention, and perception. Now, this does not prove that ancient builders intentionally designed these chambers for acoustic effects, but it raises a question. If these resonant properties appear again and again across sites separated by thousands of miles and centuries of construction, was it really a coincidence? Or were the builders deliberately creating spaces that interacted with the human mind in ways we are only beginning to understand? A mystery becomes even deeper when we examine the measurements hidden within these structures. In 1967, an engineer named Alexander Thom published the results of decades spent surveying megalithic sites across Britain and Brittany. His conclusion was controversial. He believed the builders had used a standardized unit of measurement, a unit he called the megalithic yard, approximately 0.829 meters in length. According to Thom, this measurement appeared repeatedly across hundreds of ancient stone sites. If true, the implication was extraordinary. It would suggest that people separated by vast distances shared a common system of measurement long before recorded history. Many scholars challenged his conclusions. Some criticized his methods. Others argued that the patterns he found were statistical coincidences. But despite decades of debate, the discussion never completely disappeared, because the measurements themselves remained difficult to ignore, and Thom was not the only researcher to notice hidden patterns. Across the ancient world, investigators began finding evidence of mathematical relationships embedded within monumental architecture. The Great Pyramid is perhaps the most famous example. The ratio between its height and perimeter closely approximates the mathematical constant known as pi. Not exactly, but close enough to provoke debate. Was it intentional or accidental? No one knows with certainty. Similar questions appear elsewhere. At Angkor Wat in Cambodia, some researchers believe the layout encodes astronomical information linked to specific celestial cycles. Others have argued that certain dimensions correspond to vast units of time. Again, the evidence is debated. Again, the conclusions remain uncertain. But a pattern begins to emerge. These structures seem to contain information, not written information, not inscriptions or texts, information encoded in geometry, in proportions, in alignments, in stone itself. Imagine for a moment that you wanted to preserve knowledge for thousands of years, longer than paper could survive, longer than any language could remain unchanged. How would you do it? You might carve that knowledge into something permanent, something capable of surviving floods, wars, invasions, and the collapse of entire civilizations. You might place it inside architecture. And perhaps that is exactly what happened. Because the more carefully researchers examine these monuments, the more they appear to function not merely as buildings, but as repositories. containers of knowledge, messages preserved across immense spans of time. The question is not whether information exists within these structures. The question is whether that information was intentionally placed there. And if it was, who was it meant for? Perhaps the answer lies not in individual monuments, but in the pattern that connects them all. A pattern stretching across continents, across cultures, across thousands of years of human history. What happens when we stop looking at these structures individually and begin looking at them as a network? Imagine plotting the world's major megalithic sites onto a single map. The pyramids of Giza, Stonehenge, Gobekli Tepe, the stone circles of Senegal and Gambia, the megalithic temples of Malta, Sacsayhuamán in Peru, Tiwanaku in Bolivia, the statues of Easter Island, ancient monuments scattered across 6 continents, separated by oceans, separated by cultures, separated by thousands of years. The conventional explanation is simple. Human beings naturally build monuments. When societies become organized enough, they create large structures to express identity, power, belief, and permanence. In this view, similar structures emerge independently because human beings often arrive at similar solutions. And that explanation may be entirely correct. But there is another detail worth considering. Some researchers have noted that a number of major megalithic sites appear to fall along geometric routes that can be traced across the Earth's surface. The alignments are not perfect. The interpretations are controversial. Many archaeologists remain unconvinced. Yet the patterns themselves can be measured, which creates an interesting dilemma. The debate is no longer about whether certain alignments exist. The debate is about whether they were intentional. And intention is far more difficult to prove than measurement, because ancient builders rarely left instructions behind. They left something else: the structures themselves. In archaeology, there is a concept known as archaeological silence. It refers to the absence of evidence, the places where history stops speaking. No manuals, no engineering blueprints, no written explanations, no records describing exactly how these monuments were planned or why they were built. Only stone, and stone speaks slowly. But when we listen carefully, certain messages begin to emerge. One of the clearest involves the sky. Ancient builders understood astronomy with remarkable precision. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than at Newgrange in Ireland. Newgrange is more than 5,000 years old, older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge. For most of the year, its interior chamber remains dark. But on the morning of the winter solstice, something extraordinary happens. A narrow beam of sunlight enters through a small opening above the entrance. The light travels down a long passageway and reaches the back chamber for approximately 17 minutes. Then it disappears. The alignment is astonishingly precise. For over 5,000 years, the event has continued. Generation after generation, century after century, the builders somehow calculated exactly where the sun would rise on the shortest day of the year, and they incorporated that knowledge into stone. This was not a casual achievement. It required careful observation, long-term record-keeping, knowledge passed between generations, and a reason important enough to justify the effort. The standard explanation is religious significance, the rebirth of light, the return of the sun, the renewal of life after winter. And that explanation is probably part of the truth. But precision of this level raises another possibility. Perhaps these sites were also functioning as observatories, permanent instruments designed to track the heavens, machines made from stone. And if that is true, then the builders were preserving something more than beliefs. They were preserving knowledge, knowledge that appears again and again throughout the ancient world. Yet there is another pattern, a stranger one, a pattern not of construction, but of concealment. Consider Gobekli Tepe once more. The site was not abandoned and forgotten. It was intentionally buried. The evidence is clear. The fill material covering the site was transported there by human effort, layer after layer, an enormous undertaking, nearly as demanding as the original construction itself, which raises an obvious question. Why? Why would a civilization invest so much effort creating a monument only to hide it beneath a mountain of earth? The same mystery appears elsewhere. In Malta, underground ceremonial chambers, known as hypogea, were carved deep beneath the surface. Intricate rooms connected by narrow passages, spaces that appear to have held ritual significance. And at some point, many of these chambers were sealed. Not destroyed, not reused, sealed. Carefully, deliberately, as though the act of closing them was itself important. Again and again, we find the same pattern. Construction, use, closure, concealment. As though these places were designed to serve a purpose for a specific period of time, and once that purpose ended, they were put to rest. Not erased, preserved, waiting. For what? That remains one of archaeology's most fascinating unanswered questions. Deep inside the Great Pyramid of Giza lies a room unlike any other. It is known as the King's Chamber, a simple name for a very unusual place. The chamber is constructed from enormous blocks of red granite, transported from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers away. The effort required to quarry, move, and position these stones would have been immense, yet someone considered it necessary, and that is where the mystery begins. Because the King's Chamber does something unexpected. When researchers study its acoustic properties, they find that the room resonates at specific frequencies. The walls respond, the ceiling responds. Even the floor appears to participate in the resonance. The chamber behaves less like an ordinary room and more like a carefully designed acoustic environment. The significance of this remains debated. Some researchers believe the effect is incidental, a natural consequence of the chamber's dimensions and materials. Others suggest the resonance may have been intentional, designed into the structure from the very beginning. What makes the question even more intriguing is the granite itself. Red granite contains significant amounts of quartz crystal. Quartz is known for a property called piezoelectricity. Under mechanical pressure, it can generate small electric charges. This does not mean the pyramid was a machine, nor does it prove any extraordinary claims. But it does mean the builders selected a material with unusual physical properties, and they placed it deep inside one of the most ambitious structures ever created. Why? No one knows. What we do know is this: the King's Chamber does not fit comfortably into the traditional explanation of a burial chamber. No royal mummy has ever been found inside it. No burial treasures. No inscriptions describing its purpose. No decorative scenes. No funerary texts. Only a precisely constructed room hidden within the heart of the pyramid. A room that appears to have been built with extraordinary care and then left empty for 4,500 years. Perhaps that is the most important clue of all, because when we step back and look at the evidence, a remarkable picture begins to emerge. We know the dimensions of these monuments. We know their orientations. We know approximately when many of them were built. We know which civilizations created them. We have studied their art, their tools, their construction methods. And yet the deeper question remains: why? Why the extraordinary precision? Why the celestial alignments? Why the recurring mathematical patterns? Why the acoustic properties? Why the standardized measurements? Why the deliberate concealment? The conventional answers, tomb, temple, monument, display of power, may all contain elements of truth, but they do not fully explain everything we see. there is always something left over, a residue of mystery, a detail that refuses to fit neatly into the accepted narrative. The builders of these structures lived in worlds we often describe as primitive. Many had no written language, no advanced machinery, no modern technology, and yet they achieved things that continue to surprise experts today. They tracked the movements of the heavens. They aligned stone structures with astonishing accuracy. They preserved knowledge across generations, and they built monuments designed to outlast empires. Perhaps that was their true achievement, not the movement of stone, not the construction itself, but the preservation of information, the creation of messages capable of surviving thousands of years. Messages written not with words, but with geometry, with astronomy, with resonance, with mathematics, and with stone. If that is what these structures are, then we may still be in the process of learning how to read them. Perhaps the greatest mistake we can make is assuming we already understand their purpose, because history is filled with discoveries that seemed impossible until the evidence became impossible to ignore. The ancient builders left no instruction manuals, no clear explanations, no definitive answers, only questions. Questions carved into mountains of stone, questions aligned with the stars, questions hidden beneath layers of earth, questions waiting patiently across millennia. And perhaps the most important question is not whether these structures were more advanced than we once believed. Perhaps the real question is this: are we advanced enough yet to understand what they were actually for? The stones remain silent, the monuments remain standing, and after thousands of years, their mystery remains unsolved.